I have a liberal friend with whom I discuss issues, and she's very open-minded, which is unusual for liberals these days, so we call ourselves the world problem solvers. She wrote me an email in response to a video that I shared with her that was an interview that Supramanya had with a very well-known Belgian psychologist. And some of her responses to the video I felt I needed to respond to. However, since I know how sensitive YouTube can be about certain subjects, I will be using code words as I read to you my response to her. Dear world problem solver, you claim to put your trust in the medical people who know more than we do about things like little bugs. This is true. They do know more. However, they do not know everything and are often proven wrong. Think of all the women, for example, who trusted their doctors when prescribed thalidomide back in the days for nausea during pregnancy. That's just one of many examples that I could list. The critique I have here is not that the medical personnel should have been ignored, rather that all medical opinions should have been heard and they were suppressed and not given any consideration, as would normally be the case when it comes to the science that we were reportedly told that we had to follow. And I put a link in there for the Great Barrington Declaration for her to reference. She states that millions died of COVID the world over. Well, this is also true. However, millions die every year of many things, including the common flu. This does not mean that we should have destroyed a society and deprived people of their charter rights. 2 weeks to flatten the curve somehow morphed into 3+ years, with the result a society divided and weakened, and several friends and family relationships in tatters. Also keep in mind that many who died during the pandemic of something other than it, but tested positive, were listed as COVID deaths. This inflated the actual number of deaths due to the virus and was done deliberately to keep everyone fearful and submissive. The jabs. We were promised a return to normal if only we took the jab. Our choice, but lose your job if you don't. Not allowed in restaurants and gyms if you don't. No travel permitted if you don't. Some freedom of choice. Worst of all, the jab was proven to be ineffective at both immunizing those who took this experimental and untested shot and did not prevent transmission. Same goes for the mask, a useless piece of junk made in China of all places that did not prevent the microscopic bug from floating in or out. Final point on jabs. The adverse effects are only now beginning to emerge. There are tons of them. And eventually they will all have to be acknowledged. Sadly, those who were adversely affected will have zero recourse. Eventually, when all of the details do emerge, those responsible will be retired or dead. The conspiracy theories, as you call them, many of them are turning out to be actual truths. The lab leak is the first one that comes to mind. It's easy for those who wreaked havoc on our lives to shrug now and say, oh, well, it's behind us. Time to get on with life. But there are many of us who will not forget, who will not simply move on. One can label these people, I include myself in that group, as alternative. And yes, there are some more radical than merely alternative. But thank goodness for those who question and seek the truth. As history has shown us, merely giving over responsibility for your life to a government agency or world organization does not relieve one of the duty to be true to the moral compass that should be what guides our decision-making processes. Just ask the Jews, who so submissively lined up to take the trains to the concentration camps, while their friends and neighbors turned a blind eye. You can tell me I'm exaggerating, but how far away were we from something similar? The ban on travel, the quarantine hotels, and a prime minister who said, and it's on record, that we should not tolerate the unjabbed, that they take up space. We don't want to believe that this could have escalated because we prefer to think of our government as a body that serves to protect and defend us. If I've learned one thing from these past 3+ years, it's to never trust a government body. They don't care about you or me. They care only about retaining power at whatever cost. My hope is that people will slowly wake up to the egregiousness of the handling of this pandemic and never allow it to overtake their critical thinking abilities again. I watched a documentary on Plato's Republic recently where he elaborates on his view of mankind. He describes us as sentient beings living in a dark cave where we watch puppets behind a wall that are being manipulated by invisible puppet masters. One day, somebody comes along and takes a few of these cave dwellers outside the cave. At first, they resist. It's too bright, too noisy, too much to see. But then they start to realize that the outside is in fact much more interesting than the cave. The handlers eventually return them to the cave, and when these outcasts try to convince the other cave dwellers that what they've experienced is far better than merely living in the cave, they're ridiculed and cast aside as pariahs. Ultimately, they have no choice but to reclaim their seats in front of the wall and continue to watch the puppets. Anyway, my fellow world problem solver and I may never agree on all of the above points, but at least we managed to discuss things civilly, which is indeed a rare event these days.